It's great to speak with you again, Sean. It's been a while since we've talked, and I'm looking forward to hearing your views today on a new topic. Before we start, can you provide a brief background of yourself?
Sure, happy to. Yeah, nice to connect once again. So I joined the Climate Trust as the Executive Director 1 year ago, literally to the day. Before that, I actually served on the board as Vice Chair to the Climate Trust for several years while I was running another energy and sustainability organization here in Portland for 7 years. So my background is really from the for-profit sector, although I've spent some time in the non-profit sector, and with a primary focus on sustainability, energy efficiency, and climate change.
Thanks. And then my first question is, what is the EPA 111D rule?
It's essentially, at the current stage, it's a set of guidelines that the EPA released under the Clean Air Act, and it essentially regulates, its intent would be to regulate the emissions from electricity generating units, or EGUs as they're known. And the design of the plan is fairly interesting because it essentially gives a huge amount of flexibility under the Clean Air Act, Section 111D, to the implementing states. So each state is essentially tasked with a rate reduction goal. So in Oregon, for example, our goal is 372 pounds per megawatt hour of energy generated. And the state is free to design the approach to meet the goal. So there's a lot of flexibility in the guidelines. Now remember, it's just a set of guidelines. The EPA is going to formalize this by June next year, and the following year states have to submit the state plan, which would indicate how they're going to reach the goal that's been set for their respective state. The guidelines allow various mechanisms to achieve the goal. What they don't do is allow any type of offset activity, and that's specifically because it regulates the electric generating sector, and so any type of carbon offsetting is not allowed because it's not connected to the grid, if you will. But it does allow for renewable energy credits and energy efficiency credits to come into play as part of enabling states to reach their goal. I'll stop there in case you have a question.
And how does this rule impact state plans for moving to some type of a carbon mechanism?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So under 111D, a state can opt to, there's a couple of options they have. They can go it alone and design their own state plan to meet the target, or they can look at a multi-state plan, so they can link up with other states and essentially create a trading system for renewable energy and energy efficiency credits. And in that scenario, the amalgamation of the states is considered as one entire target instead of the individual states. The states also have the ability to choose, they can stick with the rate-based emission targets that the EPA has given them, or they can choose to convert the rate-based approach to what's known as a mass-based approach. And what that essentially means is that the state of Oregon, for example, could decide that they're going to convert to a mass-based approach under which the entire state is essentially capped under an emissions umbrella, if you will. And so that instead of accounting for the emissions under each electric generating unit within the territory or the state then considers the overall net effect of emissions underneath this mass-based approach. So because of that, a lot of people have argued that EPA is paving the way to some sort of cap and trade mechanism, because the mass-based approach essentially does cap the emissions within a state. And it's kind of interesting because it definitely does pave the way, because states that opt for a mass-based approach, who then also go for a multi-state avenue to reach compliance, so they link up with other states, could essentially design a cap-and-trade multi-state trading system to meet compliance under 111D. And so And this is, of course, important because California, which has a cap and trade, and the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is the 9 northeastern states, which all have a trading block amongst those 9 states, both California and RGGI wanted to make sure that they were in compliance with 111D, given the design of their own emission reduction schemes that they have in place. So, long story short, if a state were to go for a mass-based approach with a multi-state linkage, they could opt to join California as a route to compliance, or they could emulate RGGI or join RGGI. And so this is interesting because if a state is considering a carbon tax, for example, and not a cap-and-trade system, then opting for a mass-based linked state approach might be at odds with a carbon tax. And so it really starts begging the question, what does a state do in terms of a carbon mechanism that dovetails with a 111D compliance scenario? I'll stop there because I've said a few things that's rather complex.
And what are your recommendations, or are there any implications for business executives?
Well, I think the implications for business executives fall a little further afield or down the line from 111D. I think, if EPA is successful with releasing this rule next year without further challenges, and the electric generating units or the electricity sector is essentially regulated under 111D, what's going to happen is other sectors are ultimately going to follow suit. We're going to start regulating, just like we do in California, industrial sources, transportation is going to come online in 2015. And so executives running multinational corporations had best be advised or keep a watchful eye on what sectors are going to be capped that are going to pursue the 111D effort. It's not that 111D is going to expand into these sectors. It's that a state or a regional design for reaching carbon reduction goals is going to have to consider how to account for other sectors beyond the electricity sector. And I think this is what some people in the country have been concerned about, is that 111D creates a glide path, if you will, to managing carbon emissions across multiple sectors. For us, in the carbon world at the Climate Trust, I mean, we think that that's essential if we're going to be serious about managing the carbon impacts. But we think that it's a welcome development. Executives in sectors need to watch what's going to happen in regulation, especially if states start to follow the path of California or RGGI. It could create a domino effect where states realize that joining these other systems is a lot easier than designing their own. There's an economy of scale. There's built-in efficiencies because California and RGGI have gone down the hard path of designing these systems. And if those systems comply with 111D, you can see why a state would opt for joining them. And in fact, Washington State, to our north, while it's considering both carbon tax and cap and trade, it does have a task force in place that's specifically looking at cap and trade and how a linkage to California might make sense to that state. So you see it already in these early days of 111D.
And thanks, Sean, for sharing your views today on the EPA's 111D rule.
My pleasure. Thanks, Justin.